I've met. I have met. Well, when I was 8, I met. No, I was 7 or 8. I met Steve Perry, the original lead singer from Journey. He's from here.
Okay.
And he was in town visiting, and it was really cool. Got to talk with him for a couple minutes. I met William Catt, Greatest American Hero. Met him in Malibu. I served popcorn to George Lopez at a movie theater. Same movie theater. A month later, I got to blame Leonardo DiCaprio for ruining high school for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. When he looked at me and asked why, I said, "You made a boat movie, and it ruined high school."
Anyway, all right, we are recording. Back for 50 seconds of finding out what people
There's like a minute there of people like, what the heck is Garrett talking about? That has nothing to do with Star Wars.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome, of course, to War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. Not the find out what famous people Garrett Jones has served popcorn to podcast. My name is John Mark Tolly. Joining me, as you've already noticed, is
Garrett K. Jones, the complete noob.
Oh, well, Garrett, how has your weekend been?
It's been freaking hot, man. We've this is our 4th straight week of triple digits, man.
Oh.
It is the worst. Like yesterday, it was like at least 110 outside, and my AC is working on overtime. I've got it set for like a balmy 70 degrees, something like that.
Yeah.
And at one point, about 10 o'clock last night, I was looking at my thermostat, and it said inside the house was like 76 because it's just working overtime.
Oh,
and I'm just like, and I just had it serviced like a couple months ago. It's unreal. But yeah, it's hot. Today's not as hot, and we have a little bit of a breeze. It's still over 100 degrees, but it wasn't as terrible around noontime as it was yesterday.
Okay.
Yesterday was muggy and humid and like, blah.
Yeah. I feel for you. Fortunately, where we're at, it has not been that hot. Me and the Mrs. War of the Stars spent the weekend in Chicago, Illinois, going to a Cubs Cardinals game. Let's just say one of us came back from that happier than the other person did. We are a house divided in our house, in the Tolly household. So yeah, but it was still fun. Really good environment. Wrigley Field is one of the coolest stadiums I think I've ever been to. Just really cool to go there. And Chicago is just a fun city to visit. If you're from there, if you're from Chicago, shout out, say hi, Chi-Town. We did not have Chicago-style pizza while we were there, or a Chicago dog. Though I did try to get a Chicago dog, but I couldn't find one.
How weird is that you couldn't find a Chicago dog seller in Chicago?
I'm sure I could. I saw one, but we weren't in a place where we to get it. At that point, my wife's knees were shot and she was ready to go. So, but of course, the big thing, everyone from Chicago will know this, and I agree with this: do not put ketchup on a hot dog. That is sacrilege.
What? How is that sacrilege?
No, that's like pizza. That's like pineapple on pizza.
Well, yeah,
that's like
pineapple on pizza is a travesty. No. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yes. Mustard only.
What about some relish?
That's the only beside the celery salt and the pickle and the tomato. Yeah, as far as condiment goes, mustard.
And that's how the Star Wars started, folks. You can't have ketchup on your hot dog.
No, ew. Ew.
You know what? I'll be a rebel and I'll do it anyway.
Rebel scum. Well, we are not debating the what condiments are appropriate for a a hot dog. We are talking Star Wars this week, and we're continuing our look through the history of the Galactic Civil War. And we started out by talking the reasons why the Galactic Empire lost. Then last week, which we have not put up this episode, so spoiler, we had some technical difficulties. So you guys will be getting 2 episodes in one
So
this week.
so if you've listened to last week's episode and now you're listening to this one and this week, congratulations, surprise. Technology did you guys a favor.
That's right. But yes, last week we were, spoiler alert, we talked about why the rebels won. And this week we are coming full circle and discussing as to what the reasons the New Republic essentially failed.
Now, here's the question: Are we going off of what we've seen in the expanded universe and the lore and the legends, or are we just strictly going off of what is considered canon?
Right now, we're going off canon. We'll do a little bit of both. We'll look at what happened with the New Republic in the Legends continuity, and then we can also look at the actual canon, because I mean there is quite a divergent as to I would say that the New Republic succeeded for the large part in the Legends canon. It went through some growth pains, but it lasted for quite a while. It wasn't until the Yuzeng Vong came along that you had the it kind of finally kind of collapse and then reform into the
Fell Empire.
The Fell Empire, and then you had the Galactic Alliance.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't know, like kind of just jumping into this, like just from what we've seen, because like it's weird, like anything that takes place in between Return of the Jedi and
Force Awakens.
The Force Awakens feels like this kind of weird intertestamental period. Like it's like that gap between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So there's not much known. I mean, there's history there, but you've got to pick and choose and really do some research into what's going on. And what's interesting is, like, just from what we've seen in Mandalorian, which has been kind of our prime example of what we've seen with the New Republic, is that, like, just from a logistics standpoint, they were spread too thin.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't enough of them to really make much of a difference outside of core worlds. Anything beyond the mid-rim was too far out there. They still couldn't contain what was happening on Tatooine. They still couldn't contain what was happening on planets like Navarro, and you had there was not enough resources.
Yeah, and the resources they had, I mean, they were so afraid of becoming the Empire with the military that they almost, in many ways, they shot themselves in the foot. We see that in the last season of The Mandalorian, where they talk about that they've scrapped 90% of the fleet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I can see their thinking is probably like, well, we don't want to have this big military because we don't want to be the Empire. They'd say like, well, the Old Republic didn't have a standing military, but you forget, the Old Republic had the Jedi.
Yeah.
They had,
and the Jedi worked in tandem with the military to some extent, because while the Old Republic didn't have the grand army that they had until the Clone Wars, they did have military forces, but the military forces were an alliance of the various planet systems and their own personal or their own individual military groups. Yeah. And it was basically like, hey, we need help from our allies. It was kind of like an intergalactic NATO.
Yeah. It was more. Yeah, that's a good example. The Old Republic seemed to be more intergalactic, like you said, NATO with all these individual systems, rather than like to use another star series, um, and less like a United Federation of Planets.
Yeah.
Where, and I mean,
but the Federation was mostly backed by Starfleet, and Starfleet, while it was mostly explorational, it was military.
oh yeah. But you didn't really have that with the Old Republic, but you did again have the Jedi
Right.
that were, and I think you really see that missing within the New Republic, where while you do have some Jedi, Luke and his, it's nothing like what you had at the height of the Republic,
No.
where you had thousands of Jedi.
And that's, I think, where some of the biggest problems come into play, is that you didn't have um, an independent or objective group of peacekeepers who could just kind of toe that middle line between the politics and everything else.
Yeah.
It was strictly on the government.
Right. And you see within the new series, you see how quickly these politicians went right back into the way things were in the Republic, like with the the kind of, it's the same thing that helped lead Palpatine to rise to power, was the kind of backbench politics, these kind of people, the senators worried more about lining their pockets than their actual constituents.
Yeah.
You kind of see that happening. You even see there's a scene in this past season 3 of Mandalorian, where Pershing is talking to one of the officials there, kind of rich person. And the guy, I can't remember the line, but he basically makes a comment of like, "Oh, Empire, Republic, it's all the same."
Yeah, it's the same animal. It's just a new name, new paint scheme.
Yeah,
and I think that complacency is part of the problem that comes about, is because you have all these bureaucrats who, despite what they were in the last 20 years or so, because that's about how long the empire reigns, they're kind of right back into it. And maybe they weren't the main person. Maybe they are replacing someone who was empire friendly and has been ousted from that role or that responsibility, and they are now coming in to fill the spot.
Yeah.
But it's business as usual for them, because they know how the system works. They know how to run things where they can skim off the top, or they can do something that benefits them and maintains that complacency, or maintains that level of interpolitical corruption. And that's really what Palpatine played off of the most, going back to the Old Republic, is that the Old Republic was just rife with corruption. You had all these bureaucrats who were just like arguing back and forth and not actually getting to the root of the problems. And it was, we see this in modern politics today. Regardless of what side of the fence you're on, you see senators, congressmen and women, parliamentarians in other countries, what have you, and they're looking for some way to line their pockets. The Russian and Soviet oligarchs from the Cold War are a great example of this.
Yeah. I think it's, as problematic as season 3 of The Mandalorian was, I think that's the one thing that it did really, was to kind of show what's going on with the New Republic, and how that's, I found some of those, that part of it very interesting, as far as especially with the topic that we're going into, because you see not just how corrupt it's become, but how, like you said, complacent.
Yeah.
And how, it's just kind of, and you see like, and even I mean, that's going to be interesting to see when Ahsoka comes out, is how Mon Mothma has changed
How so?
from the time of her time as leading the rebellion to now being the leader of the New Republic, and this how it's kind of being being the chancellor now. See how she's changed, and maybe even getting into her mindset of why she mothballed the fleet, why she's
Well, I ultimately, if you look at it, she the fleet because she wasn't military minded. She hated the idea of war. I mean, going back to the Clone Wars, she was one of the biggest opponents to the Clone Wars. She thought
yeah
the Republic shouldn't have even gotten involved in it, let alone build an army to defend
yeah
itself. And see, here's the thing: is that like it is, you have to look at it like from a historical perspective. If the United States coming out of the Revolutionary War, if they had done what the New Republic did, and that they mothball their entire fleet, they destroy it for parts, build houses, what have you, and they have no navy, no military force, no weapons to really defend themselves. Yeah, Britain's, the idea of Britain being this uh, unstoppable juggernaut of an empire in the 18th century, that was kind of business as usual. And the fact that a group of colonials banded together from all these different walks of life, farmers, bankers, writers, I mean, you name it, they came from all these different walks of life. They banded together, they rebelled against the empire, and they won.
yeah
And if they had done what the New Republic does in a fictional setting, America wouldn't exist today because there was enough of a remnant out there to pose a threat.
yeah
But the moment, but the fact that we didn't mothball anything, that we kept up a strategic military advantage, especially on land that we were familiar with, that gave us the edge.
mm-hmm.
And if we go back to say what Teddy Roosevelt talked about during his presidency, speak softly and carry a big stick.
Right.
There was a point for the New Republic to operate with diplomacy.
Yeah.
They could negotiate. However, they needed to be ready in case there was a resurgence of imperial military might. And there was. But instead of listening, and this brings me to another point, is that instead of listening to the rumors, instead of listening to the threats and really investigating, they just trusted things to be as they were, and they didn't pay attention to how other factions were going to play into it.
Yeah, they didn't. I think one of the biggest mistake they had is with even negotiating with the Empire. After the Battle of Scarif, they allowed the Empire to continue to exist in a limited form, albeit. But instead of just saying no, you need to either rejoin the rest of the galactic, the Republic,
Mm-hmm.
and your systems will become now part of the Republic, and all of you who were part of the Empire, who were in high, will face war crimes. Basically what the Allies did with the Germans, the German and Japanese Empire. To basically say, they should have basically said it's unconditional surrender or nothing. Those are there's your choices.
Well, and what's interesting is go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, what's interesting is when you look at Dr. Pershing in The Mandalorian, he is kind of the, if we're going back to 1930s, 40s, and looking at what happened with the Germans, he was kind of like one of those scientists that was pulled in during Operation Paperclip. Because during Operation Paperclip, the SSR and the United States started bringing in all these German physicists and scientists during the late 40s, early 50s, and it pushed our arms race. It pushed our space race with the Soviets, and it really started driving the technological advances of what was happening in this country. Because I mean, the Germans had been building up their technology for years, from between World War I and World War II. I mean, they had some of the best thinkers, some of the best engineers on the planet during that time period, and they were coming up with some crazy things. And I mean, we just had the movie Oppenheimer come out, and for them it was a race to build the bomb. And Oppenheimer knew the scientists that were working on the project for the Nazis, and there was no way that it wasn't that they weren't going to try and use it in warfare. And so that's the planet killer. That's the Death Star. And we already saw the Empire at this point. They've already produced 2 planet killing weapons. And it's like, really, this is how far they have gone, and you're willing to just be like, okay, some of you guys, we're going to give you jobs within the government.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that goes back to an interesting point, going back to the Second World War, when the Germans they had a problem in Germany when the Nazi Germany finally surrendered. And I'm wondering if you would have had maybe a similar situation within the New Republic, where in Germany after the end of the war, everyone who had any knowledge of how to run government and how to run, were Nazis. But they had this law at the beginning that you couldn't hold the public position if you were a former Nazi. But they had but ran into the problem of everyone that knew how to run the government
in a undisclosed bureaucratic setting.
But eventually they had to kind of say, like, okay, if you were like a low level, you could do it. But I'm wondering if the New Republic would have had that same problem where, everyone that knew how to, run a bureaucracy and run the different levels, were imperial or former imperial, and they had to kind of relax the rules and, say, now if you promise really, really nicely, but it looks like I haven't really read any of the books, but I've got enough of a idea of what kind of what the the system of what happened after the fall, where it appears you have these 2 different camps pop up within the New Republic, where you have centrist and more, you have one group that's wanting for a stronger central government, and then you have ones that are wanting to do more of a confederacy, where the different planets have more autonomy within the Republic and are kind of on their own, and the central government basically just kind of acts as a lot more weaker and just doesn't really have a lot of power.
Yeah, and there's so many different directions that we can take with this, because because we haven't seen everything that's now considered canon,
right?
But the other factor to that is, part of the problem that the New Republic had is that they refused to listen to military leaders, people who had been part of the Empire who defected, and people who had served during the rebellion, served during wartime, who were like, hey, look, we have to keep this up. We have to have some show of force here. And the biggest issue is that they were split, because by the time you get to The Force Awakens, you have the New Republic's main body set on Hosnian Prime, but Hosnian Prime, as mid-rim as it was, if I remember my galactic star chart correctly, it's not as close to Coruscant. Coruscant was still the galactic core, and it's like that's the capital. And if you really want to show that you are in charge, that's where you need to be. That's the planet that you need to win over, because otherwise they're still going to be, tethered to whomever was pulling their strings in the first place.
That was an interesting idea that they did with the idea of the Senate and the capital moving every few years. That was an interesting concept that the New Republic did, of kind of this kind of rotating capital where, each, I don't know if that would work in like a real world setting where a city's, a country's capital would move every 10 years. Like, all right, the seat of the government is going to move from Washington, D.C. to Detroit. All right.
I mean, on the one hand, I think that would be kind of a nifty thing, because then you could see, then whoever's in charge, whoever is leading, whoever is supposed to be representing the people, will be able to have that closer view of what's happening in a part of the country or the planet or whatever that they weren't familiar with before. But that constant uprooting and movement disrupts the flow and the chain of command fairly regularly, and you can't have that kind of disruption if you want something consistent. Which is why, like, when you had like the Roman Empire was settled in Rome, and they operated everything from that point. Now, Rome had its technological advances and its military, and that's what helped it stay strong. But you look at going back even further in history to Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was a smart enough man that he knew that his empire, as big as it got, he couldn't just lead it all from Macedonia. He couldn't just lead it from there. He had to have other people he trusted in charge. And so that's where the Ptolemies and the Seleucids came into play in Egypt and the ancient Near East, respectively. And after his fall, everything just got split up between the two, and it just made sense that would happen because they were the heirs apparent. And we're seeing that with the Empire, in fact, because Thrawn becomes that heir apparent.
Well, we are coming. That's going to be exciting to see.
Yes.
Well, we are coming up on our time limit. I think we continue this next week by looking at kind of what Legends taught us, as far as the New Republic and that continuity, because it's interesting how much different it is, I feel, between what happens in the new in the current canon and the old Legends continuity. So of course
it prompts me to get my Star Wars Legacy books back out.
Well, with that being said, why don't you, Mr. Jones, strike a conversation? 90s kids
as far as
will
where
get that.
People can reach me. Yeah, as far as where people can reach me, you guys can find me on Instagram and Twitter at GKJ_publishing, where I talk about my book series, The Archives of the Sync Ran. I have 5 books out in that fantasy series. There's a few nods to Star Wars because I like to make references to my fandoms. You can also find me on Twitter at GKJ Publishing. On that platform, I have a show called The Right Way, where we talk book recommendations, we talk author interviews, and creative writing tips. I just finished a series on world building for my Creator's Corner segment last week. This coming Saturday, the 29th, is my season 5 finale, where I will be doing my very first annual awards giveaway called The Righties.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that's spelled
WRITEYS.
Okay. All right. As for us right here, you can get a hold of us through our email, which is warofthestars1@gmail.com. You can also find us, that is also our Twitter handle at warofthestars1. All other social medias, you can find us under War of the Stars, a Star Wars podcast. You can also check us out wherever fine podcasts are heard. Just again, search War of the Stars. To support the show, patreon.com/War of the Stars, or you can check us out on our merch store. Link is in the description on our Twitter profile. So check that out. Other than that, that is just about it for us right here. Remember, this is not just my Star Wars. This is not just your Star Wars. This is our Star Wars. Until next time, may the Force be with you.
This is the way.